There are moments in life when a single act of quiet dignity can silence a crowd and change everything. In the frontier town of Silver Gulch, Baron Claymore was the wealthiest man for 100 miles, and he never let anyone forget it. When a weathered stranger named Jonas Reed rode into town, the Baron saw his chance to make a fool of him. He pointed to Diablo, a wild black stallion no man had ever tamed, and offered $1 million to anyone who could ride him. The townspeople laughed. But Jonas simply walked to the corral and did what seemed impossible. What secret allowed this quiet mountain man to succeed where everyone else had failed? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Silver Gulch had been born from silver strikes and cattle money, a town that sprouted from the high desert like a stubborn weed pushing through hardpan. By 1883, it had grown into something more than a collection of canvas tents and false-front saloons. Two-story buildings lined Main Street, their wooden facades painted in hopeful colors that faded quickly under the relentless sun. The railroad had arrived 3 years prior, bringing with it the promise of civilization and the reality of commerce. The town sat in a wide valley between two mountain ranges, the kind of place where a man could see trouble coming from miles away if he knew how to read the land. Pine forests climbed the slopes to the east, while the western hills rolled away in gentle waves of sage and grassland. A creek ran year-round through the center of town, cold and clear from snowmelt, lined with cottonwoods that turned gold each autumn and silver each spring. It was a good place to build a life, if you had the money or the grit. Baron Claymore had both. His empire stretched across the valley floor like a kingdom. The Claymore Ranch encompassed nearly 50,000 acres of prime grazing land, watered by 3 creeks and protected by mountains that broke the worst of the winter storms. His herd numbered in the thousands, prime Hereford cattle that fetched top dollar at the railhead. He owned the lumber mill north of town, held notes on half the businesses along Main Street, and sat on every town council that mattered. The Baron, he'd given himself that title years ago, and no one dared question it, lived in a mansion that seemed transplanted from San Francisco or Denver. 3 stories of whitewashed wood and glass windows, with a wraparound porch and columns that served no purpose except to announce wealth. It sat on a hill overlooking the town, a constant reminder of who held power in Silver Gulch. But money and land weren't enough for Claymore. He needed acknowledgement, deference, and the daily confirmation that he stood above other men. At 52, he wore his success like armor. Tailored suits from St. Louis, a gold watch chain that caught the light, rings on 3 fingers, and boots so polished they reflected the sky. His hair had gone silver early, which he considered distinguished. His face bore the weathered lines of outdoor work. Though he hadn't ridden fence or branded cattle in a decade, he employed 40 men at the ranch, ruled them with a combination of fair wages and absolute authority. Dutch Kruger had been his foreman for 8 years, a lean and weathered man in his middle 30s who'd learned that loyalty to Claymore meant prosperity and questions meant unemployment. Dutch was efficient, competent, and knew better than to challenge his employer's decisions, no matter how capricious they might seem. The town itself reflected Claymore's influence. Sheriff Tom Hendricks kept the peace, but everyone knew the Baron's endorsement had put the badge on his chest. Hendricks was honest enough, a former cavalry sergeant with a straight back and tired eyes, but he understood the political realities of a frontier town where one man controlled most of the wealth. He walked a careful line between law and practicality, between justice and survival. Margaret Wells owned the general store, a 2-story building that served as post office, gathering place, and informal town hall. She was 43, a widow whose husband had died in a mine collapse 5 years earlier, leaving her with a business and a keen understanding of human nature. Margaret had grey, streaking her dark hair, laugh lines around her eyes, and a direct way of speaking that sometimes got her in trouble with men who thought women should be decorative and quiet. She kept the store immaculate, knew everyone's business, and possessed a moral compass that pointed true north regardless of who disagreed. The morning Jonas Reed rode into Silver Gulch, Margaret was arranging dry goods on the shelves, preparing for the afternoon rush. She heard the horse before she saw the rider, a measured pace, unhurried. The sound of someone who'd been traveling long enough to find a rhythm with the land. She looked through the window and saw him, a man in his late 40s, maybe 50, riding a roan mare that looked as trail-worn as its owner. He wore canvas pants, a shirt that might once have been blue, and a coat that had seen repairs and weather. His hat was pulled low, and a bandana covered his neck against the dust. Everything about him spoke of function over fashion, utility over display. He tied the mare at the hitching post, spoke to her quietly, ran a hand along her neck with the kind of gentleness that told Margaret more about him than words could. The horse leaned into his touch, trusting. Jonas entered the store with his hat in his hand, a courtesy that was becoming rare. His face was weathered like old leather, tanned from sun and wind, with deep lines around his eyes that suggested he'd spent years squinting at distant horizons. His hands were calloused, scarred in places, the hands of someone who worked with rope and wood and animals. But his eyes caught Margaret's attention most. Grey-blue like winter sky, holding something that looked like sorrow, held at a distance. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough from disuse but respectful. "I'm needing some supplies if you've got them. Coffee, flour, beans, whatever you can spare." "I can spare plenty," Margaret replied, studying him with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to judge character quickly. "You just passing through or planning to stay?" "Hadn't decided yet," Jonas said. He pulled a small leather pouch from his coat, counted out coins carefully. "Depends on whether there's work. What kind of work do you do?" "Horses, mostly. Training, breaking, doctoring. Whatever needs doing with animals," Margaret nodded, already calculating. "We've got a stable that could use help. Young man runs it now, Timothy Harris. Lost his parents to fever 2 winters back. He's doing his best, but he's only 16, and some of the horses come in needing more than he knows how to give." Something shifted in Jonas's expression, a softening around the eyes. "I'd be willing to help if he'd have me." As Margaret measured out flour and wrapped it in paper, she noticed the worn journal sticking from Jonas's coat pocket. The leather was dark with age and handling, corners rounded from years of use. "You keep a diary?" she asked, knowing it was forward, but unable to resist. Jonas glanced at the journal, then back to her. "Sketches mostly. Horses, how they move, how they think. Helps me remember what works and what doesn't. May I see?" He hesitated, then pulled out the journal and opened it to a page near the middle. Margaret saw pencil drawings of remarkable detail, horses in various poses, with notes in small, careful handwriting about temperament and training techniques. But in the margins, she noticed other sketches. A young girl's face, drawn from memory, appearing again and again across different pages like a refrain. Jonas saw where her eyes had landed and gently closed the journal. "My daughter," he said quietly. "She's been gone 5 years now. Her and her mother both." "I'm sorry," Margaret said, and meant it. She understood loss, the way it carved out spaces inside you that never quite filled again. "Thank you, ma'am." Jonas took the wrapped supplies, tucked the journal back in his pocket. "I appreciate your kindness. Not everyone extends it to strangers. Silver Gulch can be a good town," Margaret said carefully, "if you stay on the right side of the right people. Baron Claymore runs most things around here. You'll likely meet him sooner or later." "I'll try to stay out of his way," Jonas replied. "I'm not looking for trouble." "Trouble has a way of finding people regardless," Margaret observed. "You take care of yourself, Mr. Reed," Jonas Reed, Margaret Wells. "You need anything else? You come back and see me." After he left, Margaret stood at the window and watched him ride toward the edge of town, where the small stable sat near the creek. There was something about him that reminded her of old trees that had weathered storms, bent maybe, scarred certainly, but still standing, still growing. She didn't know then that Jonas Reed would change everything in Silver Gulch, didn't know that his quiet arrival marked the beginning of something that would test every person in town. From the baron in his mansion to the youngest stable boy learning to muck stalls. All she knew was that trouble, as she'd said, had a way of finding people, and Jonas Reed, for all his quiet manner and gentle hands, carried the weight of something unfinished. She'd seen it in his eyes, in the way he touched that journal, in the careful distance he kept from the world. Silver Gulch had been peaceful for too long. Margaret felt it in her bones, the way old injuries ached before a storm. Change was coming on a dusty road, riding a tired mare, carried by a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. By sunset, Jonas had introduced himself to young Timothy at the stable, offered his services for room and board, and been gratefully accepted. The boy was overwhelmed, doing the work of 3 men, and Jonas's quiet competence was exactly what he needed. As darkness settled over the valley, Jonas stood outside the small tack room that would serve as his quarters, looking up at the mansion on the hill, where lights blazed in every window. He didn't know who lived there yet, didn't know about Baron Claymore's pride or power or the test that was coming. He only knew he was tired of running from his own memories, tired of living alone with ghosts and regrets. Maybe here in this dusty frontier town he could find some measure of peace. Tomorrow, he'd learn how wrong he was. The challenge came 3 days after Jonas arrived in Silver Gulch, on a Saturday when the town swelled with ranchers and their families come for supplies and socializing. Baron Claymore had planned it that way, timing his entertainment for maximum audience. Word spread quickly through the morning. The Baron was hosting a spectacle in the town square at noon. Free beer for anyone who attended, which guaranteed a crowd in a place where entertainment was scarce and alcohol was currency. Jonas heard about it from Timothy as they worked in the stable, replacing worn boards in one of the stalls. The boy was excited, chattering about how the Baron sometimes put on shows, horse races, roping competitions, even a boxing match once between 2 of his ranch hands. "You should come," Timothy said, hammering a nail with more enthusiasm than accuracy. "It's always something worth seeing." Jonas had no particular interest in spectacle, but he was curious about this Baron Claymore that Margaret had mentioned. A man who ruled a town deserved understanding, if only to know what to avoid. At 1:45, Jonas walked with Timothy toward the town square. The space was already packed with people, ranchers in their Saturday best, families with children darting between adults, working men grateful for a break and free beer. A platform had been erected at one end, and Baron Claymore stood upon it like a king addressing his subjects. He was impressive, Jonas had to admit. Tall and silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most men made in a year. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed, the easy confidence of wealth and power. When he spoke, his voice carried across the crowd without shouting. "Friends and neighbors," Claymore began, gesturing broadly, "I've gathered you here today for a contest of skill and courage. As many of you know, I recently acquired a magnificent stallion, a black beauty wild as the mountains themselves. I've named him Diablo, for surely only the devil could create something so untamable." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Jonas noticed Dutch Kruger standing near the platform, arms crossed, expression neutral. Margaret Wells stood with a group of women near the general store, her face skeptical. Claymore continued, warming to his performance. "I've had my best men try to break this horse. Not one has lasted more than 10 seconds. The beast has become something of a legend in just 3 weeks. Some say he cannot be tamed. Some say he shouldn't be." He paused for effect, letting the crowd murmur and speculate, "But I believe any animal can be mastered by the right man with the right approach. So today I'm offering a prize." He pulled a leather pouch from his coat, held it high. $1,000 to any man who can ride Diablo for 1 minute. $1,000 in gold coin. The crowd erupted. Men pushed forward, eager and greedy. $1,000 was a year's wages for most of them, a fortune that could change a life. Claymore raised his hand for silence. "But that's not all. If someone can not only ride him but truly tame him, break him to saddle and bridle, make him gentle as a child's pony, I'll pay $1 million. The number was so absurd that the crowd went silent, then exploded in disbelief and excitement. $1 million. It was more money than most of them could imagine. The kind of sum that existed only in fairy tales and fever dreams. Jonas felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't about the horse. This was about power and humiliation, about a rich man buying entertainment at the expense of both animal and men, desperate enough to try. Several ranch hands volunteered immediately, pushing forward with the bravado of youth and beer. Claymore directed them to the large corral behind the platform, where Diablo waited. Jonas followed with the crowd, drawn despite his misgivings. When he saw the stallion, his breath caught. Diablo was magnificent, pure black except for a small white star on his forehead, standing nearly 17 hands high. His coat rippled over muscles built for speed and power. But it was his eyes that struck Jonas. They weren't wild with mindless rage. They were sharp, intelligent, and deeply wary. This was an animal that had been hurt, betrayed, taught that humans meant pain. The broken bridle hanging on the fence told part of the story. So did the scars Jonas could see on Diablo's flanks, marks of spurs and whips. Someone had tried to break this horse through violence, and the horse had learned to fight back. The first volunteer climbed the fence, was handed a rope by one of Claymore's men. He made it 3 steps into the corral before Diablo charged, teeth bared. The man scrambled back over the fence, pale and shaking. The crowd laughed, nervous and excited. The second man lasted longer, actually got a rope around Diablo's neck before the stallion reared and struck out with his front hooves. The rope burned through the man's hands as he dropped it and ran. Blood dripped from his palms. 3 more tried. None got close. Diablo had learned his lesson well. Trust no human. Fight every approach. Never surrender. Jonas watched it all with growing sadness and anger. This wasn't entertainment. This was cruelty dressed up as sport, a proud animal being tormented for the amusement of people who should know better. He was turning to leave when Claymore's voice rang out. "What about you there, stranger?" The one in the worn coat looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. The crowd parted, all eyes turning to Jonas. He felt exposed, unwilling to be part of this spectacle. "I don't think so," Jonas said quietly. "Why not?" Claymore descended from the platform, walking toward Jonas with the assured stride of someone who owned everything in sight. "Too afraid? Or perhaps you think yourself too good for honest money?" It was a calculated insult, delivered with a smile that didn't reach the eyes. Jonas recognized the trap. Refuse and be branded a coward. Accept and become part of Claymore's show. "I'm not interested in your contest," Jonas replied. Keeping his voice level, Claymore looked him up and down, taking in the worn clothes, the calloused hands, the dust of long travel. His smile widened. "Look at this, friends. A mountain hermit too proud to try for a fortune. Or maybe just too poor to risk the entry fee." "There's no entry fee," someone in the crowd called out. "Ah, but there should be." Claymore pulled a gold coin from his pocket, flipped it in the air, and let it fall in the dirt at Jonas's feet. "There's your entry fee, stranger. Consider it charity from a man who has more than he needs to one who clearly has less." The crowd laughed, some uncomfortably. Jonas felt the weight of humiliation, the deliberate attempt to make him small in front of these people. He looked past Claymore to the corral, where Diablo stood watching. The horse's ears were forward, attentive. In that moment, Jonas saw past the wild fury to the pain underneath. This animal didn't need breaking. He needed understanding. "I'll try," Jonas said quietly, "but not for your money. For the horse." Claymore's expression flickered with surprise, then settled back into amusement. "How noble." "Very well, hermit. Show us your magic." Jonas walked to the corral, ignoring the whispers and speculation. He didn't climb the fence immediately. Instead, he stood outside it, hands on the rails, just watching Diablo. The stallion watched back, tense and ready to fight. "I need time alone with him," Jonas said. Claymore laughed. "Time? You want me to clear the crowd so you can commune with the beast in private?" "This is entertainment, stranger. The people want to see something happen. Then they'll see me fail," Jonas replied simply. "Because I can't help him with all this noise and pressure." Something in his tone must have registered, because Claymore hesitated. Dutch Kruger stepped forward. "Boss, what's the harm? Let him try it his way. If he fails, we get a better show when someone else tries." Claymore considered, then shrugged. 1 hour. You get 1 hour before sunset, alone with the devil horse. Then we see your miracle, or we see you run like the others." The crowd dispersed reluctantly, drawn away by the promise of more free beer. Jonas waited until the square was mostly empty, until the only sounds were the wind in the cottonwoods and the creek running nearby. Then he climbed over the fence and sat down in the dirt. His back against the rails, Diablo snorted, pawed the ground, ready for confrontation. But Jonas didn't move. He just sat there, not looking directly at the horse, not advancing or challenging. He simply existed in the same space, patient and still. Minutes passed. The sun tracked lower. Diablo circled the corral, always keeping Jonas in sight, testing for threat. Jonas began to hum, very softly, a tune his daughter had loved, a melody that belonged to another life. He let his mind drift to memories of teaching her about animals, about patience, about trust. She'd had a gift for it, that little girl. Could gentle any creature with enough time and kindness. "You remind me of her," Jonas said quietly to Diablo, hurt and angry and not sure if the world is safe. "I understand that. I've been there too." The horse's ears flicked forward, listening. "Someone hurt you bad," Jonas continued, voice low and steady. "Tried to break your spirit because they didn't understand that strength and pride aren't flaws to be beaten out. They're gifts to be respected." Slowly, carefully, Jonas reached into his pocket and pulled out an apple he'd saved from breakfast. He set it on the ground in front of him, then returned his hand to his lap. Diablo watched, waited. More minutes passed. The shadows lengthened. In the distance, Jonas could hear the town beginning to gather again, drawn by curiosity and the approaching deadline. Then, with a caution that broke Jonas's heart, Diablo took one step forward, then another. His whole body was tense, ready to bolt, but curiosity and perhaps loneliness drove him forward. He reached the apple, snatched it quickly, backed away, ate it while watching Jonas with those intelligent, wary eyes. Jonas smiled just a little. That's right. Sometimes taking a chance on trust pays off. The sun touched the horizon. Voices grew louder outside the corral. Jonas stood slowly, keeping his movements calm and predictable. He walked to the center of the corral, not approaching Diablo directly, just standing there with open body language. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I'm not going to force you or break you. But these people need to see something, and I need you to trust me for just a minute. Can you do that?" Diablo snorted, tossed his head, but he didn't run. Jonas extended his hand, palm up, waited. The horse took one step, another, stretched out his neck, sniffed Jonas's hand. In that moment, the crowd outside grew silent. Everyone had returned to see the stranger's inevitable failure, and instead they were witnessing something none of them had expected. Jonas slowly moved his hand to touch Diablo's neck. The horse flinched but didn't bolt. Jonas stroked once, twice, speaking softly all the while. Then, with a faith that came from somewhere beyond logic, Jonas gripped Diablo's mane and swung himself onto the horse's bare back. Diablo danced, uncertain, powerful muscles bunching. The crowd held its collective breath. Jonas sat easy, balanced, hands gentle in the mane. He leaned forward and whispered something no one else could hear. The horse stilled, snorted once, then, as if making a decision, began to walk. Jonas guided him with pressure and voice. No bridle, no bit, no force. Just communication between two creatures who understood suffering and survival. They walked the perimeter of the corral once, twice. Then Jonas guided Diablo toward the gate. Dutch Kruger, acting on instinct, opened it. Jonas rode Diablo out into the town square, past the stunned crowd, down Main Street in the last light of day. The stallion's hooves kicked up small clouds of dust that glowed gold in the sunset. Man and horse moved together like they'd been partners for years, not minutes. By the time they returned to the corral, full night had fallen. Torches had been lit. Every person in Silver Gulch stood in silence, watching something they'd never forget. Jonas dismounted, stroked Diablo's neck one more time, and walked out of the corral. Baron Claymore stood there, his face unreadable in the flickering torchlight. "How?" he asked, his voice tight. Jonas looked at him steadily. "You don't break what's wild. You earn its trust." The crowd erupted in cheers and amazement. People surged forward, wanting to touch Jonas, to ask questions, to celebrate the impossible thing they'd just witnessed. Through it all, Claymore stood silent. Then he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "That was impressive, stranger, truly impressive. But the wager was for complete taming. What you did was a trick, not training. A one-time event, not mastery." The crowd's celebration faltered, confused. "I'm not paying $1 million for a trained circus performance," Claymore continued. "The bet was to break the horse, not charm him for a few minutes. I'm afraid there's no prize here." Shocked murmurs ran through the crowd. Margaret Wells pushed forward. "Baron, everyone here saw what happened. The man tamed your horse exactly as you described." "He rode the horse," Claymore corrected coldly. "For a few minutes. In a week, Diablo will be just as wild as before." The wager was clear. Permanent taming. "This proves nothing." Jonas said nothing. He simply looked at Claymore with those winter sky eyes, seeing the man clearly for the first time. This wasn't about the money. Never had been. This was about a rich man's pride, about power, about the need to never be bested by someone he considered beneath him. "I didn't do it for your money," Jonas said quietly. "I did it because the horse deserved better than what you were giving him." He turned and walked away, leaving Claymore standing in the torchlight, surrounded by a crowd that had seen something shift in their town. A rich man's word, once considered law, had been revealed as flexible as his vanity required. In the shadows at the edge of the square, Dutch Kruger watched his employer's face and felt the first stirrings of doubt about the man he served. In her doorway, Margaret Wells shook her head, knowing that this wouldn't end here, that pride like Claymore's couldn't tolerate being showed up by a stranger in worn clothes. And in the stable, where Jonas returned to his small tack room, the mountain man sat on his cot and pulled out his worn journal. He sketched Diablo by lamplight, capturing the moment when the horse had decided to trust. Beneath the drawing he wrote, "Some things are worth more than gold. Some moments are worth all the consequences that follow." He didn't know how right he was. 2 weeks passed, and Silver Gulch settled into an uneasy rhythm. Jonas worked the stable from dawn until dusk, his patient methods transforming not just the horses, but the way people thought about handling animals. Word spread beyond the town limits. Ranchers from neighboring valleys began bringing their difficult horses to the stable, asking specifically for Jonas Reed. Timothy flourished under Jonas's teaching. The boy had natural talent buried under years of insecurity and loss, and Jonas knew how to draw it out with steady encouragement and practical wisdom. They worked together like a well-matched team, Timothy's enthusiasm balanced by Jonas's calm experience. One morning, Timothy arrived at the stable carrying something wrapped in cloth. His face was bright with nervous excitement. "I made something for you," he said, thrusting the bundle toward Jonas. "It's not much, but, well, just look." Jonas unwrapped the cloth to find a hand-carved wooden horse, about 6 inches tall. The craftsmanship was rough, the proportions not quite right, but the effort and care were unmistakable. The horse was depicted mid-gallop, mane flowing, capturing movement and spirit despite the amateur carving. "Timothy," Jonas said softly, turning the figure in his hands, "this is beautiful." "I've been watching you work with the horses," Timothy explained, words tumbling out quickly. "How you study them, how you see what makes each one unique. I wanted to try capturing that, but I'm not very good at carving yet." Jonas looked at the boy, seeing in him the same eagerness to learn, to improve, to matter that Emma had possessed. "You know what makes this special? It's honest. You carved what you saw with your own eyes, not what you thought you should see. That's the beginning of real skill." He went to the tack room and returned with his own journal, opening it to show Timothy the sketches inside. I wasn't always good at this either. See these early drawings? The proportions are all wrong, the lines uncertain. But I kept practicing, kept observing, kept trying to understand. Timothy studied the pages with wonder, seeing the progression from crude sketches to detailed studies. You think I could learn to draw like this? I think you can learn to do anything you set your mind to, Jonas said. But more than that, I think you've got something that can't be taught. You care about the work. You want to understand animals, not just use them. That matters more than perfect technique. The boy beamed, and Jonas felt something in his chest loosen, a knot of grief that had been tied so tight for so long. This teaching, mentoring, passing on knowledge, this was a way to honor Emma's memory, to take the love he had no one left to give and channel it into making someone else's life better. That afternoon, a woman rode into the stable yard on a nervous mare, leading another horse behind her. Jonas recognized her from town, Rachel Summers, the widow who owned a small ranch about 5 miles north. She was in her early 40s, with sun-weathered skin and hands that knew hard work. Her dark hair was pulled back practically, and she wore canvas pants like a working rancher, not the skirts most women in Silver Gulch insisted on. "Mr. Reed," she said, dismounting with the easy grace of someone born to horses, "I was told you might be able to help with a problem." The horse she'd been leading was a paint gelding, beautiful coloring but badly traumatized. He flinched at every movement, eyes rolling white, body trembling. "What happened to him?" Jonas asked, approaching slowly, keeping his body language non-threatening. "Previous owner used spurs and whip," Rachel said, her voice tight with anger. "Beat the spirit nearly out of him. I bought him at auction last month, thinking I could help, but—" She shook her head. "I don't have your gift. He's getting worse, not better." Jonas spent the next hour examining the gelding, never touching, just observing. He noted the scars, the flinch patterns, the specific triggers that caused panic. Timothy watched, learning, while Rachel stood quietly, respecting the process. "He'll heal," Jonas finally said. "But it's going to take time and patience. The damage goes deeper than the physical scars. Someone broke his trust completely. We have to rebuild it piece by piece." "How long?" Rachel asked. "Months, maybe. Can't rush healing." Rachel nodded, then hesitated. "Mr. Reed, I can't pay much. The ranch isn't... Things are tight since my husband passed." "I'm not asking for payment," Jonas said. "Just bring him by every few days. We'll work with him here, and I'll show you what to do at home. Between us, we'll get him right." Something shifted in Rachel's expression, a softening around the eyes. "The town's talking about you, you know. Some say you're a troublemaker. Others say you're the best thing to happen to Silver Gulch in years. Baron Claymore's been spreading stories." "I know," Jonas said simply. "Do you also know he's not going to stop? Men like Claymore, their pride is worth more to them than reason." "I'm not trying to fight him," Jonas replied. "Just trying to do honest work." "Sometimes that's the same thing." Rachel gathered her reins, preparing to leave. "My husband used to say that doing right often means standing against those who profit from wrong. He died trying to prove it, stood up to some cattle rustlers, got shot for his trouble." Her voice caught slightly. "Left me with a ranch, 2 hands, and enough debt to drown in." "I'm sorry," Jonas said, meaning it. "Don't be. He lived according to his principles. That's more than most manage." She swung into the saddle, looked down at Jonas with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What I'm saying is, there are people in this town who see what you're doing, who appreciate that you won't be bullied. You're not as alone as you might think." After she rode away, Timothy turned to Jonas with questions in his eyes. "Is it true? What Mrs. Summers said about the Baron trying to drive you out?" Jonas considered lying, protecting the boy from adult complications, but decided Timothy deserved honesty. "Yes, but that's not your burden to carry. You just focus on learning, on becoming the horseman you're meant to be. But what if he succeeds? What if you have to leave?" Jonas put a hand on the boy's shoulder, felt him steady under the touch. "Then you'll keep doing this work. Everything I'm teaching you, it doesn't disappear when I do. It stays in you, becomes part of who you are. That's what teaching means, passing on something that outlasts the teacher. That evening, Margaret brought news that wasn't really news, more like confirmation of what everyone already sensed. She arrived at the stable as Jonas was closing up, her face serious. "Town council's meeting again tomorrow," she said without preamble. "Claymore's calling for a vote on a business licensing ordinance. Anyone operating a commercial enterprise needs approval from the council, which means approval from the Baron. He's trying to shut down the stable," Jonas said, "trying to control everything, more like. If this passes, he'll have leverage over every business owner in town." "But yes, you're the immediate target." Jonas leaned against the fence, suddenly tired. "I never wanted any of this, Margaret." "I know. But sometimes what we want and what we get are two different things." She smiled slightly. "The good news is you've got more support than Claymore expected. People are starting to see through him. Dutch Kruger quit his job at the ranch yesterday. Did you hear?" Jonas shook his head. "Walked off the job, told Claymore he was done being part of whatever vendetta this has become. That's significant. Dutch was the Baron's right hand for years." "One man standing up won't stop this," Jonas said. "No, but it's a start. And you're not one man anymore, Jonas. You've got Timothy, you've got Rachel. You've got me and half the town watching to see if decent people can still win against money and power." She touched his arm gently. "You showed us something with Diablo. You showed us that patience and understanding can accomplish what force and cruelty can't. Now we're all learning that lesson applies to more than just horses." In the corral, Diablo stood watching them, the wild stallion who'd become gentle through trust rather than breaking. Jonas looked at the horse and thought about transformations, about how creatures, human and animal alike, could change if given reason and time. But time was something Baron Claymore seemed determined not to grant. Up in the mansion on the hill, Claymore sat at his desk, writing letters to contacts in territorial government, to judges and lawyers, to anyone with influence he could leverage. Pride had long since given way to obsession. He no longer cared about the money or even the original slight. This had become about power itself, about proving that in Silver Gulch, his word was still law. On his desk lay a telegram he'd received that afternoon, a response to inquiries he'd made about hiring a certain type of professional, the kind of man who could solve problems that intimidation and legal maneuvering couldn't touch. The reply was simple: "Man available. Arrives in 1 week. Payment on completion." Claymore folded the telegram, placed it in his desk drawer, and allowed himself a thin smile. Jonas Reed had proven surprisingly resilient, but every man had a breaking point, and if pushing him legally and socially wouldn't work, then perhaps fear would. The Baron had spent his entire life getting what he wanted one way or another. He wasn't about to let a mountain hermit with sad eyes and gentle hands change that now. Tomorrow's council meeting would be just the beginning. The town council meeting drew the largest crowd Silver Gulch had seen since the 4th of July celebration. People packed into Margaret's back room until bodies pressed against walls and the air grew thick with heat and tension. Those who couldn't fit inside stood at the windows, straining to hear. Jonas attended this time at Margaret's insistence. He stood near the back, uncomfortable with the attention, aware that every eye in the room flicked toward him at some point. Baron Claymore arrived precisely at the appointed hour, dressed as if attending a territorial legislature session rather than a small-town council meeting. He carried a leather folder thick with documents, the appearance of bureaucratic legitimacy, masking what everyone knew was personal vendetta. Sheriff Hendricks called the meeting to order, his voice weary. "We're here to discuss Baron Claymore's proposed business licensing ordinance." "Baron, you have the floor." Claymore stood, laying out papers with practiced precision. "Thank you, Sheriff. What I'm proposing is simple common sense. Silver Gulch is growing. We have businesses operating without oversight, without accountability. This ordinance would merely require that anyone conducting commercial activity register with the town council, provide references of good character, and maintain standards appropriate to our community." "Sounds reasonable on the surface," Dr. Marsh observed, adjusting his spectacles. "But the details concern me. These standards you mention, who defines them? The council would establish guidelines, Claymore replied smoothly. We'd evaluate each application on its merits, considering factors like the applicant's background, financial stability, and contribution to the community. Margaret leaned forward. In other words, you'd have power to deny business licenses to anyone you personally don't approve of. I'd have no special power, Claymore countered. The council votes as a body. A council where you hold notes on half the members' properties, Margaret shot back. Let's be honest about what this really is, Baron. This is about Jonas Reed and your wounded pride. The room erupted in murmurs. Claymore's face tightened, but his voice remained controlled. This has nothing to do with Reed specifically. This is about the future of Silver Gulch. Then why bring it up now? Sheriff Hendricks asked. We've operated for years without such requirements. Because circumstances change, Claymore said. We now have strangers arriving with questionable backgrounds, setting up operations without vetting. That's a risk we shouldn't accept. Samuel Potter, the lumber mill owner, spoke up nervously. I think the Baron makes valid points about growth and standards. Perhaps some form of registration isn't unreasonable. Easy for you to say, Margaret snapped. You're already established. This would make it nearly impossible for new people to start businesses here. It would freeze Silver Gulch exactly as it is, with exactly the same power structure we have now. Frank Dietrich from the saloon raised a hand. I'd like to hear from Mr. Reed himself. You're awful quiet back there for someone whose livelihood is being discussed. All eyes turned to Jonas. He felt the weight of expectation, the hope from some and hostility from others. He thought about staying silent, letting others fight this battle, but remembered Emma's voice urging courage. I don't have much to say, Jonas began quietly, except that I came here to work with horses, not to cause trouble for anyone. If this town decides it doesn't want me, I'll respect that and move on. But I hope you'll consider what kind of place you want Silver Gulch to be. What does that mean? Claymore demanded. Jonas met his eyes steadily. It means you can build a town on fear and control, where people do what they're told because someone powerful says so. Or you can build one on fairness, where people are judged by their actions and character, not by whether they defer to the right person. That choice is yours to make. Easy philosophy from someone with nothing to lose, Claymore said coldly. I've lost everything that mattered, Jonas replied, his voice carrying an edge of pain that made several people look away. So yes, maybe it is easier for me to see clearly. But that doesn't make it wrong. Rachel Summers stood up from where she'd been sitting near the middle of the room. I'd like to say something. Mr. Reed has been helping me with a traumatized horse. He's charging nothing, asking nothing, just doing good work, because he believes the animal deserves better. That's the kind of person we should want in our community, not drive away because one man's pride got dinged. I second that, Timothy called out, his young voice cracking with emotion. Mr. Reed's teaching me things nobody else would take time for. He's been kinder to me than anyone since my parents died. More voices joined in, some supporting Jonas, others defending Claymore. The meeting devolved into arguments and crosstalk until Sheriff Hendricks banged his fist on the table. Enough! We'll vote. All in favor of Baron Claymore's licensing ordinance. Hands rose slowly. Samuel Potter reluctantly. Frank Dietrich, after visible hesitation. Dr. Marsh kept his hand down, shaking his head. All opposed? Margaret's hand shot up immediately. Sheriff Hendricks raised his more slowly but firmly. Dr. Marsh joined them. 3-2, Hendricks announced. The ordinance fails. Claymore's face went white, then red. For a moment, he looked like he might say something intemperate, but he gathered his papers with shaking hands and stood. This council has made a grave mistake. You'll regret prioritizing sentiment over good governance. He strode from the room, and the crowd parted like he carried contagion. After he left, the tension broke into relieved conversation. People clustered around Jonas, offering support or asking questions. Margaret looked satisfied but concerned. You won this round, she told Jonas quietly, but men like Claymore don't lose gracefully. He'll find another way. I know, Jonas said. He did know. He'd seen it before. in outlaws who couldn't accept that their way of life was ending, in powerful men whose kingdoms crumbled. They always fought hardest when losing, always did their most damage when desperate. That night, as Jonas recorded the day's events in his journal, he wrote, "Emma, I stood up today, said what I believed in front of people who had every reason to reject me. Some did, some didn't, but I did what you would have wanted. I'm starting to understand that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and speaking truth anyway." He closed the journal and looked at the wooden horse Timothy had carved, now sitting on the small table beside his cot. It represented something precious: connection, mentorship, the possibility of family even after loss. Whatever Claymore did next, Jonas decided he would face it standing up. Not because he wanted conflict, but because some things were worth the cost of defending. The stable was quiet, except for horses breathing in their stalls. Outside, Silver Gulch slept under a canopy of stars. The town unaware that in his mansion, Baron Claymore was composing a telegram to a man known only as Blackjack Morrison, a professional problem solver who operated in the grey spaces between law and violence. The message was simple: "Come immediately. We'll pay your usual rate. Problem must be resolved permanently. By morning, the telegram would be sent. In 3 days, Morrison would arrive, and Jonas Reed's time of relative peace would be over." The Driscoll brothers arrived 2 days after Morrison's departure. They came at dusk, 3 men on horseback, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. Unlike Morrison, they made no pretense of discretion. They rode straight to Claymore's mansion, tied their horses at his gate, and walked inside like they owned the place. Sheriff Hendricks watched from his office window, his hand resting on the telegraph key. He could wire the territorial marshal, request assistance, but by the time help arrived, it would be too late for whatever the Driscolls had been hired to do. Besides, he'd learned enough about territorial politics to know that Baron Claymore's money reached farther than a small-town sheriff's influence. The eldest Driscoll, Kane, was 42 years old and had been solving problems with violence since he was 15. His younger brothers Abel and Seth had learned their trade from him. Together they were efficient, ruthless, and utterly without conscience. The kind of men who would burn down a stable with horses inside if the contract called for it. Word reached Jonas through multiple sources. Margaret brought the news first, her face pale. Rachel arrived an hour later with the same information. By nightfall, even Timothy had heard. The Driscolls were in town, everyone knew why, and the stable would likely burn before morning. Jonas called a meeting in the stable after closing. Margaret, Rachel, Timothy, and Sheriff Hendricks gathered in the tack room while Jonas laid out the situation with the calm precision of a man who'd planned dozens of operations against dangerous opponents. "They'll come tonight," Jonas said. "Probably after midnight when the town's asleep. They'll expect me to be here alone, probably try to burn me out so I run into the open where they can finish it quickly." "Then you can't be here," Margaret insisted. "Sleep somewhere else tonight, somewhere they won't look, and let them burn the stable. Kill the horses." Jonas shook his head. "That's not an option." "Neither is you dying," Rachel said sharply, her eyes fierce. "Jonas, you've done enough. You stood up to Claymore, proved your point. Nobody expects you to die for it." Jonas looked at each of them in turn. 5 years ago, I chose not to finish pursuing 3 outlaws because I wanted to be with my dying daughter. They killed 3 more people before someone else stopped them. I've lived with that choice every day since. I'm not running from this fight because it's the easier path. This isn't the same situation," Hendricks said. "Those outlaws were criminals, threats to innocent people. The Driscolls are here because one man's pride got wounded. That's not worth dying for." "Maybe not," Jonas agreed. "But what about Timothy? What about every person in this town who stood up for me, who chose principle over Claymore's money and threats? If I run now, what does that teach them? That power and violence always win? That decent people should just keep their heads down?" The room fell silent. Timothy spoke up, his voice steady despite his fear. "I'm staying with you, whatever happens." "No," Jonas said immediately. "You're not. This isn't your fight. You told me that courage means standing up even when you're scared, Timothy countered. That family means choosing who you're loyal to, not just accepting the one you're born into. Well, I choose you, Mr. Reed. You're the closest thing to family I've got, and I'm not leaving you to face this alone. Jonas felt his chest tighten. He looked at this boy who'd lost so much, who'd found the strength to trust again, and saw Emma's courage reflected back at him. Timothy, I'm staying, the boy repeated, jaw set. Dutch Kruger appeared in the doorway, startling everyone. Make that two of us staying, Jonas stood. Dutch, thought you quit Claymore's employment? I did. But that doesn't mean I'm deaf to what's happening in this town. Dutch entered the tack room, his weathered face serious. I've worked for Claymore for 8 years. I know how he thinks, how he operates. And I know the Driscoll brothers. Crossed paths with them in Wyoming a few years back. They're dangerous, Jonas. Not the type who'll give you a chance to surrender or work things out peaceful. I know what they are. Jonas said quietly. Then you also know you can't face all three alone. Dutch pulled off his hat, ran a hand through his grey-streaked hair. I've done things I'm not proud of, following Claymore's orders. Maybe I can't undo all of it, but I can stand with you tonight. Make up for some of the wrong I've been part of. Hendricks stepped forward. If we're talking about making stands, I should mention that as sheriff, I have a duty to protect citizens from threats. The Driscolls try anything illegal in my town, they'll answer to me. Claymore will ruin you, Margaret warned. Your job, your reputation, he'll destroy it all. Then he destroys it, Hendricks replied with a shrug. I wore a cavalry uniform for 12 years before I put on this badge. I didn't fight in 3 campaigns to come home and watch good men get murdered because someone's feelings got hurt. Jonas looked around the room at these people who'd chosen to stand with him. It reminded him of the old days, assembling posses of good men to face down bad ones. The difference was these people weren't professional lawmen. They were shopkeepers and ranch hands, widows and orphans, people with everything to lose and no obligation, except the one their consciences demanded. If we do this, Jonas said carefully, we do it smart. The goal isn't to kill anyone. It's to survive, protect the horses, and make clear that Silver Gulch won't tolerate this kind of threat. He moved to the small table where his old saddlebags sat, opened it, and pulled out items he hadn't touched in 5 years. A worn leather gun belt with a holster that had molded to the shape of a single revolver. The tarnished badge of a U.S. Marshal, inscribed with the words, "Justice through Mercy." Everyone stared as Jonas buckled the gun belt, the movement automatic despite the years. He held the badge for a moment, thumb tracing the inscription, then pinned it to his shirt. This isn't about being a marshal again, he explained, but it's a reminder to me, and hopefully to them, of what I believe in. That even dangerous men deserve a chance to choose differently. Margaret touched the badge gently. Justice through mercy. That's really what you lived by? Tried to. Didn't always succeed, but I tried. Jonas looked at each person in the room. Here's what we're going to do. First, we move the horses. Rachel, can we take them to your ranch? Already planned on it, she said. I've got 4 hands who can help move them tonight. Good. Timothy, you're going with the horses. Don't argue, he added as the boy opened his mouth to protest. If something goes wrong here, those animals need someone who knows how to care for them. That's you. Timothy looked like he wanted to argue more, but finally nodded. Yes, sir. Sheriff Dutch and I will prepare the stable. The Driscolls will expect me alone and vulnerable. Instead, they'll find 3 men who know what we're doing, in a defensive position we've had time to set up. What about me? Margaret asked. You coordinate communications. If this goes bad, someone needs to document what happened. Make sure the truth gets out. Also, he pulled the leather pouch Morrison had left, still full of Claymore's money. Take this. If I don't survive, use it to help Timothy. Get him proper schooling. Give him options beyond just stable work. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Jonas, don't talk like that. Have to. It's possible I won't walk away from this. He smiled slightly. But I'll do my damnedest to prove that wrong. The next few hours were a flurry of careful preparation. Rachel and her ranch hands arrived with wagons. Horses were led out quietly, one by one, loaded and transported away from danger. Diablo went last, the black stallion who'd started everything, now gentle enough to be led by a teenage boy. As Timothy prepared to leave with the last wagon, Jonas pulled him aside. "I need you to understand something. Whatever happens tonight, you keep going. You take everything I've taught you and you build a good life. You hear me?" "I hear you," Timothy said, voice thick. "But you're going to be fine. You're Jonas the Just. Legends don't die in stable fires. Legends are just men who got lucky and told good stories," Jonas replied. "But I appreciate the faith." They embraced briefly, and then Timothy was gone, riding into the darkness with the last of the horses, carrying the carved wooden figure Jonas had tucked into his saddlebag. The stable felt empty without the animals, hollow and echoing. Jonas, Dutch, and Hendricks worked by lamplight, setting up their defensive positions. They barricaded some entrances, cleared lines of sight for others, positioned water barrels in case of fire. Dutch shared intelligence about the Driscolls, how they operated, what tactics they preferred, their tendencies in combat. Hendricks contributed his military experience, understanding of crossfire and covered positions. By midnight, they were ready. They extinguished the lamps, settled into position, and waited in darkness. Jonas sat with his back against a support beam, his old revolver in his hand. He'd cleaned and loaded it earlier, the motions automatic despite the years. The weight felt familiar, like putting on an old coat that still fit. He thought about Emma, about Sarah, about the life he'd lost, and the strange new one he'd found here in Silver Gulch. He thought about the horses they'd saved, about Timothy learning to be a horseman, about Margaret's fierce loyalty and Rachel's quiet strength. Whatever happened in the next few hours, Jonas realized he was grateful. For the first time in 5 years, he'd lived again instead of just surviving. He'd made connections, stood for something, mattered to people who mattered to him. The badge on his chest caught a sliver of moonlight through a gap in the wall. Justice through mercy. It had been his creed once, the principle that guided every decision. Maybe it still was. Dutch whispered from his position near the front entrance. "Movement. 3 riders, coming from the direction of Claymore's place." "Everyone ready?" Jonas asked quietly. "Ready," Hendricks confirmed from his spot near the side door. "Remember," Jonas said, "we don't shoot first. We give them a chance to walk away. Every man deserves that much." "Even men coming to kill us?" Dutch asked. "Especially them. Because how we act when we're scared and threatened, that's who we really are." The sound of horses being tied outside reached them. Boots on hard-packed dirt. Low voices conferring. Then silence, the kind that happens before violence, when everyone's made their choices and consequences are about to unfold. Jonas touched the badge one more time, breathed a quiet prayer to a daughter he'd see again someday, and prepared to prove that courage and principle could survive even when matched against cruelty and greed. The door at the front of the stable burst open, and a burning lantern arced through the darkness toward the nearest pile of hay. The lantern crashed into the hay where Jonas had positioned one of the water barrels earlier, next to a pile of wet burlap they'd soaked specifically for this purpose. Dutch moved instantly, smothering the flames before they could catch. The stable filled with smoke, but not fire. Kane Driscoll's voice cut through the darkness. "Reed, we know you're in there. Come out and this ends quick. Stay inside and you burn." Jonas stepped into a shaft of moonlight where he could be seen but remained protected by a thick support post. "I'm here, but you boys should know. I'm not alone, and this stable isn't as easy to burn as you were probably told." 3 figures moved in the entrance, silhouettes against the night sky. Kane in the center, his brothers flanking him. All 3 held weapons, pistols visible even in the dim light. "Don't matter how many of you there are," Kane called back. "We were paid to deliver a message, and we deliver what we're paid for." "What message is that?" Jonas asked, keeping his voice calm. "That Baron Claymore owns Silver Gulch. That men who embarrass him don't stay to brag about it." Kane moved forward a step and Jonas could see him more clearly. Hard face, cold eyes, a man who'd stopped seeing other people as human long ago. Now we can do this professional or messy. Professional means you walk out, take what's coming to you, and it's over fast. Messy means we come in after you. Third option, Jonas replied. You boys turn around, ride back to Claymore, and tell him his money's no good here. Tell him threats don't work, violence doesn't work, and Silver Gulch is done being scared of him. Kane laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's not how this works, old man. We took the contract, we complete it. That's what keeps men hiring us. Then you should know who you're up against, Sheriff Hendricks called from his position. That old man is Jonas Reed, formerly U.S. Marshal Jonas the Just. He brought in more dangerous men than you'll ever be, most of them alive. He's giving you a chance to be smart. I suggest you take it. The name clearly meant something. Seth, the youngest Driscoll, took an involuntary step backward. Jonas the Just? That's just stories. Stories based on truth, Dutch added from his spot. I've seen his work. You boys are good, but you're not that good. Walk away while you can. For a moment, the standoff hung in perfect balance. 5 men, all armed, all ready, but with one crucial difference. The Driscolls had come expecting to intimidate or murder a helpless target. Instead, they faced prepared, skilled opponents who knew what they were doing. Kane made the decision. Rush them. 3 on 3, close quarters. They won't risk burning the building with themselves inside. But Seth hesitated, his youthful bravado cracking against the reality of facing a legend. That hesitation saved his life. Kane and Abel charged forward into the stable, and everything happened with the brutal efficiency of violent men in close quarters. Dutch intercepted Abel near the entrance, the 2 men crashing together in a tangle of fists and grappling. Abel was younger and stronger, but Dutch had decades of rough experience. They rolled across the stable floor, each trying to gain advantage. Jonas moved to intercept Kane, but the older Driscoll was faster than expected. He fired twice, bullets splintering wood inches from Jonas's head. Jonas returned fire, aiming for Kane's shoulder, trying to wound, not kill. His shot went wide as Kane dove behind a support beam. You're getting old, Marshal, Kane taunted. Slow. Soft from all those years in the mountains. Maybe, Jonas agreed, moving carefully, using the stable's layout to his advantage. But I'm not trying to kill you, Kane. You're trying to kill me. That gives me options you don't have. Sheriff Hendricks had moved to secure Seth, who stood frozen in the entrance, his gun half raised but his nerve failing. Drop it, son, Hendricks said quietly. You don't want to die for Baron Claymore's wounded pride. Seth looked at the gun in his hand, looked at his brothers fighting in the smoke-filled stable, and made the choice that would save him. He dropped the weapon, raised his hands. Smart boy, Hendricks said, kicking the gun away. Now sit down and stay out of this. Inside, the fight between Dutch and Abel had turned savage. They'd both lost their weapons, reduced to grappling and punching with desperate intensity. Abel got Dutch against the wall, hands going for his throat. But Dutch brought his knee up hard, broke free, and landed a solid punch that sent Abel stumbling. Jonas and Kane were circling each other in the center of the stable. 2 men who understood violence but approached it from different philosophical foundations. Kane sought to dominate and destroy. Jonas sought to survive and protect. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Kane said, breathing hard. Just give up, Reed. Die with some dignity instead of drawing this out. I spent 5 years dying slowly, Jonas replied, his gun steady despite the chaos around him. I'd rather live, even if it's messy, Kane fired again. Jonas ducked behind a water barrel. The bullet punched through wood, but spent itself in the water, harmless. Outside, a crowd was gathering, townspeople drawn by the gunfire, by the shouting. Margaret stood at the front, her face illuminated by the torches several people carried. Rachel was beside her, both women armed with rifles, ready to intervene if the Driscolls tried to flee or if Claymore sent reinforcements. The fight had drawn the line Silver Gulch had been avoiding for weeks. Every person standing in that crowd had to choose: support Claymore's version of order, or support Jonas's version of justice. Most chose Jonas. Their presence, armed and watchful, meant the Driscolls were surrounded. Their escape route cut off. Cain realized this too. Through the stable walls, he could hear the crowd, could sense the trap closing. His brothers were losing their fights. Seth had surrendered. The professional calculation he'd made upon arriving, 3 armed men against 1 hermit, had proven catastrophically wrong. "Enough," Jonas called out. "Look around, Cain, you've lost. Surrender now and you all walk away alive. I give you my word on that, the word of Jonas the just." Cain laughed bitterly. "That's supposed to mean something." "It means I keep my promises," Jonas said. "Which is more than you can say for the man who hired you." The standoff broke when Dutch finally subdued Abel with a chokehold that left the younger Driscoll unconscious, but breathing. Dutch dragged him toward the entrance, dropped him in the dirt beside his surrendered brother Seth, then returned to stand with Jonas. "2 down," Dutch called to Cain. "Just you left. Your brothers are alive because we chose to let them live. Make the same choice for yourself." Cain's face twisted with fury and calculation. He was cornered, outmaneuvered, facing the end of his professional reputation if he surrendered, but facing death if he continued. The gun in his hand trembled slightly, rage warring with survival instinct. "You think you've won something here?" Cain spat. "You've just made an enemy of everyone who hires men like me." "Word spreads, Reed. Nobody's going to want you around when they know you turned the Driscoll brothers into a laughing stock." "I can live with that," Jonas replied quietly. "Can you live with being dead?" The moment hung suspended, everything balanced on the edge of Cain's choice. Outside, the crowd held its breath. Dutch and Hendricks stood ready. Jonas kept his weapon trained, but his finger off the trigger, giving Cain every possible chance to choose life over pride. Then something unexpected happened. The crowd outside parted, and Baron Claymore himself strode through, his expensive suit rumpled, his face contorted with rage. He'd clearly been watching from somewhere nearby, had witnessed his hired guns failing spectacularly. "Finish it," Claymore shouted at Cain. "That's what I paid you for. Kill him." Cain looked at his employer with something approaching disgust. "Your money's no good if I'm dead, Baron, and that's where this is headed if I keep pushing." "Then you're worthless," Claymore snarled. He reached into his coat and pulled out a nickel-plated revolver, expensive and ornate, the kind of weapon a man bought for show rather than use. The crowd gasped. Sheriff Hendricks moved immediately. "Baron, put that weapon down. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly," Claymore replied, his voice shaking with emotion. "This nobody, this mountain hermit has destroyed everything I built. My reputation, my authority, my place in this town. All of it ruined because he couldn't accept his station." Jonas stepped into full view, holstering his own weapon deliberately. "Baron, it's over. Your hired guns failed. The town's turned against you. Pulling that trigger won't change any of it. It'll just add murder to your crimes." "Maybe," Claymore agreed, raising the pistol toward Jonas, "but at least I'll have the satisfaction of watching you die." Dutch started to move, but Jonas held up a hand, stopping him. "Let him choose, Dutch. Every man deserves that." The crowd watched in horror as Baron Claymore, the wealthiest and most powerful man in Silver Gulch, prepared to commit murder in front of dozens of witnesses. Years of unchecked pride, of believing his money made him untouchable, had led to this moment of absolute madness. His finger tightened on the trigger, then Dutch Kruger tackled him from the side, sending both men crashing to the ground. The pistol fired, the bullet going harmlessly into the night sky. Dutch wrestled the weapon away, while Hendricks and 2 townsmen rushed forward to restrain Claymore. The Baron fought like a desperate animal, screaming incoherently about respect and station and rights. But he was 52 years old, soft from easy living, and no match for men hardened by labor and conflict. Within moments, Hendricks had him in handcuffs. "Baron Claymore," the sheriff said formally, "I'm arresting you for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit arson, and inciting violence. You have the right to wire for a lawyer from the territorial capital." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Seeing their baron, their king, reduced to a handcuffed, weeping man was like watching a god revealed as mortal. Some looked satisfied, others disturbed, But everyone understood that Silver Gulch had fundamentally changed in the last hour. Cain Driscoll stood watching it all, then carefully set his own gun on the ground. "I surrender to Sheriff Hendricks. Whatever charges he wants to file, I'll face them legal." "Smart choice," Jonas said. He walked over, extended his hand. "For what it's worth, I respect you making it." Cain looked at the offered hand like it might be a trap, then slowly shook it. "You're a strange man, Marshal Reed. Most men in your position would want revenge." "Revenge doesn't heal anything," Jonas replied. "Just makes the wound deeper." The Driscoll brothers were taken into custody, charged with attempted arson and assault. Seth, having surrendered early, would face lighter charges. Abel, unconscious and injured, was carried to Dr. Marsh's office for treatment before jail. Baron Claymore was led away to a cell, still raging about injustice and ingratitude. The crowd watched silently as the man who'd ruled their town for over a decade was reduced to just another prisoner. Margaret pushed through to Jonas, tears streaming down her face. "You're alive." "Thank God you're alive." "Barely," Jonas admitted, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. "But yes, alive." Rachel appeared beside Margaret, and to Jonas's surprise, she hugged him tightly. "Don't you ever scare me like that again?" "I'll try," he said with a tired smile. Dutch approached, nursing a bruised jaw and split knuckle. "That was one hell of a fight, Reed. Like the old days, I imagine." "Better than the old days," Jonas corrected. "In the old days, I was alone. Tonight, I had people standing with me. That makes all the difference." Timothy came running from wherever he'd been hiding, despite Jonas's orders to stay away. The boy crashed into Jonas with a force that nearly knocked them both over, holding on like he'd never let go. "It's all right, son," Jonas said softly, one hand on Timothy's head. "It's over. We're all okay." The crowd began to disperse slowly, people heading home to process what they'd witnessed. The stable stood undamaged, except for some bullet holes and smoke stains. The horses were safe at Rachel's ranch. The Driscolls were in custody. Claymore's reign had ended, not with a dramatic flourish, but with a whimper and handcuffs. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Jonas stood in the stable doorway, watching Silver Gulch wake to its new reality. His badge caught the first rays of sunlight, the inscription still clear despite its tarnish, "Justice through mercy." He'd lived by that creed tonight, giving every man chances to choose differently. Some had taken those chances, others hadn't. But Jonas had kept his principles intact, had proven that strength didn't require cruelty, that courage didn't require revenge. "What happens now?" Timothy asked, standing beside him. Jonas looked at the boy who'd become his son in all the ways that mattered. Now we rebuild. We bring the horses home, repair the damage, keep teaching what needs teaching. Life goes on, son. That's always what happens after the fighting stops. Life goes on." In his cell, Baron Claymore sat on a rough cot, his expensive suit dirty and torn. His empire crumbled. He would eventually be tried, convicted on reduced charges, and released after paying substantial fines. But he would never recover his former position, never again rule Silver Gulch with unchecked authority. Pride had been his downfall, just as Jonas had predicted. And in losing everything, perhaps he would finally learn what the mountain man with gentle hands had tried to teach him from the beginning. That true worth comes not from breaking what's wild, but from earning its trust. 3 months later, autumn painted Silver Gulch in shades of gold and amber. The cottonwoods along the creek had turned, their leaves catching sunlight like coins. The air carried that particular crispness that comes before winter, when the world takes a breath before sleeping. The stable had been rebuilt, larger than before and better designed. Community members had contributed labor and materials, turning reconstruction into a collective project. What had nearly been destroyed by violence became instead a symbol of what people could build together when they chose cooperation over conflict. Above the main entrance hung a new sign, and carved by Jonas and Timothy, working side by side over several evenings. "Reed and Son Stables," it proclaimed in neat letters, with a carved horse in mid-gallop underneath. Timothy's design, executed with increasing skill. The sun had been Timothy's idea, offered shyly one evening as they worked. Jonas had said nothing for a long moment, emotion closing his throat, before pulling the boy into a hug and agreeing immediately. The formal adoption papers had been filed 2 weeks later with the territorial court. Jonas stood in the stable yard, watching Timothy work with a young mare brought in by a rancher from the next valley. The boy moved with the patient confidence Jonas had taught him, speaking softly to the nervous animal, reading her body language, responding with gentle firmness. He was good at this, not just competent but genuinely gifted. Emma would have liked him, Jonas thought. They would have been friends. Rachel Summers rode up on the paint gelding that had been so traumatized months earlier. The horse moved easily now, calm and trusting, transformed by the same patient approach that had worked with Diablo. Rachel herself looked different too, less burdened, more at peace. Her ranch was thriving with Jonas's help and guidance, and something deeper than friendship had been growing between them. Careful and unhurried. "Morning," she called, dismounting with easy grace. "Morning," Jonas replied, smiling. "He looks good." "You've done well with him." "We both did," Rachel corrected. She walked closer, and Jonas caught the scent of sage and leather that always seemed to surround her. "I've been thinking about partnership. The ranch is doing better, but I could use someone with your knowledge permanent-like. And Timothy's going to need more space as he gets older. Maybe some land of his own, someday to build on." She paused, suddenly shy. "I thought maybe, if you were interested, we could combine operations. Your stable skills with my land and herd. Build something bigger together." Jonas understood she was offering more than just a business arrangement, though she was giving him the dignity of approaching it professionally first. "I think that sounds like a fine plan," he said carefully. "We should discuss the details." "Over dinner tonight?" Rachel suggested, a small smile playing at her lips. "At my place?" "I'd like that," Jonas said, and meant it. Margaret Wells arrived moments later, carrying a basket covered with cloth. "Brought you boys some lunch," she announced. "Fresh bread and that apple butter you both like." "You spoil us," Jonas said, accepting the basket. "Someone has to." "Lord knows you'd both forget to eat if left to your own devices." Margaret surveyed the stable with satisfaction. "It looks wonderful, Jonas. Better than before." "Community built it," Jonas replied. "I just helped coordinate." "That's leadership," Margaret observed. "Knowing how to bring people together for common purpose." "The town council's been talking. There's an opening for a deputy position under Sheriff Hendricks. We'd like you to consider it." Jonas shook his head gently. "I appreciate the offer, but no. I'm done with badges and official authority. What I do here, teaching, working with animals, helping Timothy grow, this is enough." "Fair enough," Margaret said. "But know that the offer stands if you change your mind." Dutch Kruger appeared, leading a grey gelding that needed shoeing. He'd taken a job at the stable after everything settled, finding he liked honest work better than enforcing a rich man's whims. He and Jonas had formed an unlikely but solid friendship, two men who'd both made choices they regretted and were trying to do better. "This one's ready for the farrier," Dutch reported. "Timothy said to tell you he's almost done with the mare, wants you to check his work." Jonas nodded, then paused. "Heard anything from the Baron lately?" Dutch's expression darkened. "He's living in that little house on the edge of town. Keeps to himself mostly. Lost almost everything in fines and legal fees. The ranch got sold off in pieces to pay his debts." He was quiet for a moment. "I saw him yesterday, working in his garden. Actually working with his hands, dirt under his fingernails. Never thought I'd see that. People can change," Jonas said. "If they want to badly enough, maybe," Dutch agreed, though he sounded doubtful. That evening, as the sun set over the valley, Jonas stood with Timothy outside the stable. The horses were settled for the night, everything secure and peaceful. In the corral, Diablo grazed contentedly, the wild stallion who'd started this whole journey now gentle as a lamb. "You know what I realized?" Timothy said, leaning against the fence beside Jonas. "That first day when you tamed Diablo. You weren't just helping a horse. You were showing everyone a different way of doing things. showing that you don't have to break what's wild, you just have to earn its trust. That's a wise observation, son. You taught me that. Not just with horses, with people too. With life. Timothy pulled the carved wooden horse from his pocket, the one Jonas had made years ago for Emma. Jonas had given it to him months back, passing on the memory with love instead of grief. I want to be like you when I'm grown, patient and kind, but strong enough to stand up when it matters. Jonas put an arm around the boy's shoulders. You're already well on your way to being better than I ever was. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Somewhere in town, lamps were being lit in windows. Families were gathering for evening meals. Children were being tucked into bed with stories and kisses. The ordinary, beautiful rhythm of life continuing. Jonas thought about the journey that had brought him here, from the mountains where he'd hidden from grief, through the challenge with Diablo, through conflict and violence to this moment of peace. He thought about Emma and Sarah, and knew somehow they would approve of the life he'd built from the ashes of loss. Margaret had been right months ago. Trouble had found him when he rode into Silver Gulch, but so had redemption, purpose, family, and hope. The cost had been high, but the rewards were higher. Come on, Jonas said to Timothy. Let's close up for the night. Rachel's expecting us for dinner, and I don't want to be late. Us? Timothy asked with a grin. She invited both of us? Family dinner, Jonas confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair. That's what we are now, family. You, me, and maybe Rachel too, if things keep going the way they're going. Timothy's grin widened. I'd like that. She's good people. Yes, she is. They walked toward the stable to finish evening chores side by side, their shadows long in the fading light. Behind them, the sign creaked gently in the breeze, Reed and Son Stables, marking not just a business but a promise kept. You don't break what's wild. You earn its trust. Jonas had proven that truth with horses. He'd proven it with people. He'd proven it with himself, learning to trust life again after loss had nearly broken him completely. And in a small frontier town called Silver Gulch, where pride had once ruled unchecked and power had gone unquestioned, that simple truth had transformed everything, not through force or violence, but through patience, courage, and the stubborn insistence that mercy and justice could coexist. The wooden horse Timothy had carved sat in the stable office window, catching the last rays of sunlight. Beside it, Jonas's old marshal badge rested on a shelf, no longer worn but never forgotten, a reminder of who he'd been, who he'd become, and the long road between the two. In the end, that road had led him home, not to a place he'd known before, but to a place he'd built through choosing right over easy, through standing when it would have been simpler to run, through opening his scarred heart to trust again. Home wasn't where you came from, Jonas had learned. It was where you chose to stay, where you chose to fight for, where you chose to build, despite everything that tried to tear you down. Silver Gulch was home now. The stable, the boy, the woman who made him think about futures instead of just surviving presents. This was his place, earned through trial and proven through fire. As full darkness settled over the valley, a single light burned in the stable office. Jonas and Timothy finishing paperwork, planning tomorrow's work, living the quiet, beautiful ordinariness of a life well lived, and that, in the end, was worth more than all the gold in the territory.